The wind roared across the frozen plains, tearing through the barren trees and rattling the thin walls of Amer's small hut. Snow whipped against the wooden roof, falling in thick, swirling sheets that made it almost impossible to see beyond the small clearing where his home stood. The storm had come suddenly, faster than he had expected, and now it threatened to trap anyone foolish enough to be outside. Amer pulled his woolen cloak tighter around his shoulders and stared into the dim light of the fireplace. The warm glow was comforting, but it seemed fragile against the fury of the blizzard outside. Each gust of wind made the hut groan, and he could hear the faint scratching of the animals huddled outside, desperate for shelter. He had seen storms like this before, but something about this one felt different. It carried a strange, restless energy, as if the storm itself were alive and searching for something. Amer's heart thumped a little faster as he thought about the loneliness that would come with being trapped here for days. The cold was dangerous, yes, but isolation was worse. He moved closer to the fire, rubbing his hands together to bring back warmth. The flames danced and crackled, casting shadows across the wooden walls. It was comforting, yet it felt like the walls were not enough to keep the world outside at bay. Suddenly, a knock at the door shattered the quiet. Amer froze, his heart leaping into his throat. Who could possibly be out there? The blizzard was brutal, freezing, and unwelcoming. Travelers never dared to cross these plains in such conditions. Yet, the knocking continued, weak but insistent, as if someone or something was desperate to get in. Amer hesitated for a moment, his hand on the wooden latch. Every instinct told him to be cautious, but the sound of someone in danger pierced his hesitation. He opened the door slowly. Standing there, shivering and almost invisible in the whirling snow, was a figure unlike anything he had ever seen. At first, he thought it was a trick of the wind, a shadow formed by the snow. But then he saw the faint shimmer of her skin, glowing slightly even in the dim firelight, and the wide, fearful eyes that darted nervously from one corner of the hut to another. She was thin, almost fragile-looking, and her breaths came in quick, shallow gasps that showed how exhausted she was. The snow clung to her long, silvery hair, and her clothes, strange and unfamiliar, were tattered and frozen stiff. Amer's first reaction was surprise, then curiosity, and finally, a deep concern. He stepped aside to let her in, but she hesitated at the doorway, pressing herself against the frame. She looked at him with wide eyes, almost pleading, as if she expected him to attack. His heart ached when he saw the fear in her gaze, but he understood. To her, he was just another unknown creature, another danger in a world that had already been cruel to her. "Come inside," he said gently, keeping his voice calm and soft. He didn't want to scare her further. "It's safe here." For a long moment, she said nothing. She only blinked, uncertain, her eyes flicking to the fire, to the walls, to the floor. Then, as if the storm outside became louder and more threatening, she stepped forward, slowly, and allowed Amer to close the door behind her. The sound of the wind outside seemed to shrink, muffled by the thick wooden walls, and the firelight painted her in warm orange and gold. She shivered violently, curling her arms around herself as she looked up at him. Amer noticed the fear in every part of her posture, but also a hint of relief that she had made it inside. He grabbed a thick blanket from the bed and approached her carefully, draping it over her shoulders. Her body was trembling not just from the cold, but from the terror he could feel radiating from her. He knelt slightly, so he was closer to her height, and said, "You are safe now. You don't have to be afraid." Her eyes widened even more, and she pressed herself against the wall. A strange melodic whisper escaped her lips, incomprehensible, yet full of urgency and fear. Amer nodded slowly, understanding that words alone might not calm her yet. She had come through something unimaginable, braved the storm, and survived the freezing plains. That in itself was a testament to her courage. Amer built the fire higher, letting the warmth fill the room, hoping the heat would ease her fear as well as her cold. He watched her from across the room, quiet and patient, waiting for her to trust him enough to move closer. Outside, the blizzard continued its furious dance, but inside the little hut, a fragile sense of hope began to grow. The storm had brought her to him, and perhaps, he thought, this encounter was the beginning of something extraordinary. Lyra huddled in the corner, her slender frame shaking with cold and fear. Every sound from the hut, the crackle of the fire, the wind tapping against the walls made her flinch. Amer watched quietly, understanding that this creature had endured horrors he could only imagine. Her wide eyes never left him, darting with suspicion, curiosity, and something deeper, terror. She had fled through the blizzard, risking frostbite and exhaustion, and yet here she was, still terrified of him. Amer moved slowly, careful not to make sudden gestures. He knelt on the floor, keeping his hands visible, his posture open and unthreatening. "It's okay," he said softly. "You are safe here." His voice was low, steady, and warm. He could see her struggling to comprehend, to trust that he was not the danger she had been running from. Lyra's alien features twisted in confusion. She whispered a few words, in a language Amer could not understand, her voice trembling. Her lips formed shapes he could not mimic, but the emotion in her tone was clear fear, caution, and desperation. He nodded gently, hoping that his calm presence would speak louder than words. Amer picked up a bowl of warm broth from the small table. Steam rose in soft curls, carrying the smell of cooked meat and herbs. He placed it near her, then backed away slightly, giving her space. "You must be hungry," he said. His words were simple, but he hoped they conveyed care. Lyra glanced at the bowl, then at him. Her fingers twitched as if she wanted to reach for it, but her body remained tense, as though she expected it to be a trap. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the fire's crackle. Amer stayed still, patient. He knew that forcing trust would only worsen her fear. Slowly, Lyra extended a trembling hand toward the bowl. Amer held his breath and did not move. Her fingers brushed it, then retreated. She stared at him, studying his face, searching for signs of malice. Finally, with a quiet, hesitant motion, she took the bowl and lifted it to her lips. She sipped cautiously, her eyes never leaving his. Amer smiled gently, relieved that she had taken that small step. "Good," he said softly. "You are safe. No one will hurt you here." She seemed to consider this for a long moment, her eyes scanning every corner of the hut. Amer realized that the fear she carried was not just of him, it was the fear of a world that had already hurt her, a world that hunted her relentlessly. He understood that trust for her was not given easily. It had to be earned, moment by moment. To bridge the gap between them, Amer decided to share a little of himself. He pointed to himself and said, "Amer." Then he gestured at her, indicating she could give her name if she wanted. Lyra's eyes widened, and she hesitated. Finally, her soft alien voice whispered, "Lyra, that's a beautiful name," Amer said warmly. "Welcome, Lyra." She flinched at the sound of his voice, then, slowly, relaxed a fraction. She pressed herself closer to the fire, letting the warmth reach her chilled body. Amer realized that the smallest gestures offering food, warmth, and a simple smile were beginning to chip away at her terror. Hours passed, and the storm continued outside. Snow lashed against the walls, but inside, there was a fragile calm. Amer kept the fire going, carefully feeding it with small logs, while Lyra sat on the floor, wrapped in the blanket he had offered her. She ate slowly, cautiously, each bite a small victory over the fear that had gripped her since the moment she arrived. Amer spoke softly, telling her about the plains, the animals he cared for, the simple routines of his life. Lyra listened quietly, occasionally tilting her head, absorbing the strange, human sounds and ideas. There was a tentative curiosity in her eyes now, mingling with the lingering fear. She was beginning to see that this human, though unfamiliar, posed no threat. At one point, she reached a hand toward the fire, just to feel the warmth on her skin. Amer watched her carefully, ready to respond if she panicked. But she stayed still, her gaze softening. For the first time since she had arrived, Lyra let herself relax, if only a little. The fear had not vanished, but it had loosened, replaced by the faintest spark of trust. Amer realized then that fear could be overcome not by force, but by patience, understanding, and gentle care. Lyra had come to him terrified, alone, and lost. And though she could not speak much in his language, her presence, her willingness to stay, and her tiny gestures of trust were proof that something extraordinary was beginning to take root in understanding between human and alien, fear giving way to hope. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside Amer's hut, the firelight cast a gentle glow that softened the edges of fear. Lyra sat on the floor, wrapped tightly in the blanket Amer had given her, her alien eyes flicking nervously toward every shadow. She was still wary, still trembling from the cold and the memories of the dangers she had fled. But she no longer pressed herself entirely against the wall. Small steps had been taken, and for Amer, that was enough to begin. He moved slowly, carefully placing another log on the fire. The warmth spread, chasing back the cold that had clung to her bones. "Do you want more food?" he asked softly, holding out another bowl. Lyra hesitated, her hand hovering over it. She stared at him, searching his face for signs of deceit or threat. Finding none, she took it, her fingers brushing his briefly before retreating to her chest. The contact was slight, almost accidental, but it felt to Amer like a bridge being built, fragile and delicate. "Good," he said quietly, "eat slowly. You need your strength." Lyra nodded, her lips moving as she whispered something in her own language. Amer could not understand her words, but the tone was lighter than before, still cautious, but less fearful. He realized that she was beginning to trust him, even if only in the smallest ways. Every meal she took, every glance toward the fire, every small movement closer to the warmth was a step toward feeling safe in this human world. Once she had eaten, Lyra curled up on the floor, her eyes half closed. She seemed to relax, though her body still twitched occasionally, startled by the wind outside. Amer sat nearby, careful not to loom over her, watching silently. He wanted her to know she could rest without fear. After a long moment, Lyra spoke, her voice trembling. "Danger outside," she said softly, pointing toward the snow-lashed windows. Amer nodded, understanding her completely. "Yes, it is dangerous, but not here. Not now. You are safe inside," he replied. His words were simple, clear, and patient. He could see the tension in her shoulders ease slightly as she listened. Curiosity began to peek through her fear. Lyra tilted her head toward him, watching every movement he made. Amer smiled gently. He picked up a small wooden toy he had carved for his niece long ago, a simple figure of an animal, and placed it near her. "This is a fox," he explained. "It's from my world. See." Lyra reached out slowly, her fingers trembling, and touched the wooden figure. Her skin felt smooth and warm beneath her touch. She examined it closely, turning it over in her hands, and for a moment she forgot about the storm outside and the danger that had chased her here. She looked up at Amer, and in her eyes, he saw the first real glimmer of trust. "You are kind," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Amer's heart warmed. She had survived countless horrors, and yet she was beginning to believe that humans could be more than predators. They could be protectors. "I try," he said softly. "I do what I can." The rest of the day passed slowly. Amer and Lyra did not speak much, but their presence together created a quiet understanding. He kept the fire burning and moved around the hut, doing small tasks, while she observed. Every so often, she would mimic a small action he took, curious, testing the world around her. Each gesture, no matter how small, was a thread weaving trust between them. At one point, she looked directly at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You, different," she said, the words halting but meaningful. Amer nodded, understanding. "Different can be good," he replied gently. She studied him for a long moment, then gave a slight nod, her tension easing further. By nightfall, the storm outside had not lessened, but inside the hut, a fragile peace had settled. Lyra had begun to understand that Amer posed no threat. He had offered food, warmth, and patience, the things she had not known she could trust. And in return, she had taken the first steps toward accepting him. Amer sat near the fire, watching her sleepily curl against the blanket. He felt a quiet pride, knowing that trust, once so impossible, was beginning to grow. This alien woman, far from her home, had survived a blizzard, survived fear itself, and now, slowly, she was learning that not all beings were enemies. Some could be friends, allies, protectors. And for Amer, that fragile trust was a reminder of humanity's strength not in weapons or survival alone, but in compassion, patience, and the courage to extend a hand to the frightened and the lost. The fire crackled softly, its warmth spreading through the small hut and pushing back the biting cold that lingered from the blizzard. Lyra sat closer now, the blanket wrapped snugly around her shoulders. The fear in her eyes had lessened, replaced with a cautious curiosity. Amer noticed the change and felt a quiet relief. She was beginning to trust him, and that trust was fragile, delicate, like a new flame that could either grow strong or flicker out. For a long moment, silence filled the hut. Then Lyra spoke, her voice low and hesitant. Her words were alien, strange to Amer's ears, but the tone carried a deep weight of suffering. He could not understand her language, but he listened carefully, sensing the emotions behind each syllable. There was fear, yes, but also pain, loss, and exhaustion. She had come through horrors that he could not imagine, and the storm outside was only the most recent trial in a life full of dangers. Lyra's gaze shifted to the fire as she began to move her hands in a strange pattern, almost like painting invisible shapes in the air. Amer leaned forward, curiosity mixing with caution. He could tell she was trying to explain, to share something vital. Slowly, she spoke again, this time in broken words he could understand. "Creature, big hunts, destroys my world." Her voice trembled, but she pressed on. "I run, alone, no safe, anywhere." Amara's heart tightened. The enormity of what she had endured was staggering. A world destroyed, hunted relentlessly by a merciless creature, and yet she had survived. He realized that every step she had taken to reach him was an act of courage and determination beyond anything he had experienced in his own life. He wanted to say something, to comfort her, but words felt too small for the suffering she had faced. "You are very brave," Amer finally said, his voice gentle. "You have survived so much, and you are here. That is incredible." Lyra's eyes met his, shimmering faintly under the firelight. For a brief moment, the fear that had shadowed her features seemed to fade. She had fled storms, predators, and death itself, and now she was faced with a human who spoke words of comfort instead of threat. It was confusing, and yet, it was a relief. She shifted slightly, curling the blanket tighter around her. Not safe, not trust anyone, before, she whispered. Only run, hide, survive." Amer nodded, understanding the depth of her caution. "I know. You don't have to trust me completely yet, but here, with me, you can rest, you can eat, you can be safe for now." Slowly, her posture relaxed, a little, just enough to let him see the vulnerability beneath her armor of fear. She was exhausted, yes, But she was also beginning to realize that not every being she encountered would seek to harm her. For the first time in a long while, she could imagine safety, even if only for a short while. The hours passed quietly, the storm outside relentless, but inside the hut, the warmth of the fire and the presence of another being kind, patient, human created a small bubble of peace. Amer continued his gentle talk, sharing small stories of life on the plains, how he hunted, how he cared for the animals, simple joys and small triumphs. Lyra listened intently, sometimes tilting her head, fascinated by the strangeness and simplicity of human life. Strange, different, not hurt, like humans? She asked, her voice hesitant, but tinged with hope. Umair smiled softly. Not all humans are cruel. Some of us try to help. We care for others, even those we don't know. He watched her reaction closely. She nodded slightly, as if beginning to understand, as if realizing that not all creatures in the universe sought only to destroy. By nightfall, the snow had piled high against the walls, but the hut felt warmer than ever. Lyra's trembling had slowed, her breathing more even. She had told a part of her story enough to reveal the magnitude of what she had endured, but she still remained cautious. Amer knew the process of trust would be slow. It had to be. She had survived countless horrors, and her instincts were finely tuned to fear. Yet, in that quiet hut, with firelight dancing across the walls and snow piling outside, a fragile bond had begun to grow. Fear had not disappeared, but it had softened, and in its place, the first tiny spark of connection, an understanding that humans could offer safety, kindness, and hope, had started to shine. Amer looked at her and felt a deep respect. She had survived storms, predators, and unimaginable loss. And now, she was here, in his hut, sharing her story with a stranger, trusting him in small ways. That trust, fragile though it was, felt like a gift, one he vowed to protect, even against the harshest storms. The storm outside raged on, relentless and unyielding, but inside Amer's hut, the fire burned steadily, casting warm light across the walls and floor. Lyra sat near the fire, her knees pulled to her chest, watching the flames flicker. The earlier tension in her body had softened, though small trembles still ran through her. She had survived horrors she could not even fully explain, and yet here, in this small human hut, she felt the strange beginnings of peace. Amer moved quietly, stacking another log on the fire. He glanced at Lyra, who was now studying him with wide, curious eyes. For hours, they had shared silence, small gestures, and cautious glances. Each of those moments had built a bridge between them, a fragile connection, born from patience and understanding. He wanted to help her see that she could trust him fully, but he knew it would take time. "You must be tired," he said softly. "You've been running for so long." Lyra's eyes flickered toward him. She nodded slowly, the movement almost imperceptible, but it spoke volumes. She had been running from danger for what felt like an eternity, and the thought of stopping, of resting, was both terrifying and relieving. She whispered something in her alien language, and Amer, sensing the meaning, simply smiled gently and said, "Rest, then. The storm is outside. Here, you are safe." After a few moments, Lyra shifted slightly, inching closer to the warmth of the fire. Her eyes watched Amer's every movement, curious and cautious. He noticed the way she studied his hands, his face, his posture, as if trying to understand him completely. It struck him then that trust was not given easily, not after what she had endured. Every gesture of hers was deliberate, every glance a question, and every small act of acceptance, a victory. Umair reached for a small wooden carving he had made, long ago, a fox. Simple, but detailed. He placed it near her and said softly, "This is from my world, a fox. See?" Lyra's fingers trembled as she reached for the carving. Her touch was delicate, almost reverent, as if she feared breaking it. She examined it carefully, turning it in her hands, and for a moment, she forgot the storm, the fear, and even her exhaustion. Amer watched her quietly, sensing that this small act, sharing something from his life, was more important than he could have imagined. "You, kind," she whispered, her voice trembling but soft. Amer's chest warmed. She had survived death, betrayal, and fear, yet she was beginning to see him not as a threat, but as someone who could offer safety and care. "I try," he said simply. "We all do what we can to help, right?" Lyra tilted her head, studying him. Her eyes glimmered faintly in the firelight, reflecting curiosity, wonder, and something new, hope. For the first time since arriving at his hut, she let herself feel a tiny bit of comfort. Not full trust, not yet, but a moment of connection. Hours passed quietly. Amer continued tending the fire and telling simple stories of his life. How he hunted, how he survived winters, how he had found joy in small things. Lyra listened intently, occasionally tilting her head or whispering words he did not understand. Each sound, each gesture, deepened the fragile bond between them. At one point, she reached out a hand toward the fire. Amer watched, ready to react, if she panicked, but she merely let the warmth touch her fingers. She held the sensation for a long moment, as if savoring it, before withdrawing her hand carefully. That small act, so simple, felt monumental to Amer. Trust, he realized, was built one tiny moment at a time. "You? Different," Lyra said, her voice hesitant but thoughtful. Umair smiled. "Different can be good," he replied. "Not all beings are the same. Some try to help, not harm." Lyra considered his words, her gaze softening. Slowly she nodded, a gesture of acceptance and understanding. The storm outside continued its violent dance, but inside, a fragile warmth grew not just from the fire, but from the quiet connection forming between human and alien. For Amer, the moment was profound. This alien woman, who had fled unimaginable danger and carried fear in every heartbeat, was beginning to trust him. It was proof, he thought, of humanity's strength not in weapons, or skill, or survival alone, but in patience, kindness, and the courage to show compassion to those who needed it most. And as the night stretched on, Lyra leaned slightly closer to the fire, letting the warmth and safety envelop her. The fragile threads of trust had been woven, and a moment of connection had blossomed a seed that could grow into something extraordinary. The blizzard that had roared for days outside Amer's hut finally began to weaken. The wind's fury softened, and the snow fell more gently, drifting lazily to the ground. Light from the weak sun filtered through the icy clouds, casting the world in a pale glow. For the first time in days, the plains seemed peaceful, almost welcoming. Inside, the warmth of the fire continued to chase back the cold, and Lyra sat near it, her eyes reflecting both caution and curiosity. She had spent hours watching Amer move about the hut, observing his small routines, feeding the fire, cleaning, preparing food. Slowly, she had begun to relax in his presence, allowing herself to feel that she could be safe here. Her trembling had diminished, replaced with a quiet attentiveness. Every glance, every small gesture, told Amer that she was beginning to trust him more. "Look," Amer said gently, pointing toward the window where snowflakes sparkled like tiny diamonds. "The storm is ending." Lyra turned her gaze to the outside world, her eyes wide with awe. She had spent so long running, so long hiding, that the sight of calm seemed almost impossible. She whispered softly in her alien tongue, and Amer could feel the mixture of relief and disbelief in her voice. She was still cautious, still unsure of the world outside, but the soft sunlight and falling snow gave her a moment of wonder. Amer approached slowly, kneeling beside her. "You don't have to go out yet," he said. "Take your time. The world is still dangerous for you." She nodded, grateful, but her eyes lingered on the horizon. Amer could see the conflict in her, the desire to stay safe inside, and the pull to step into the new day. He understood that she had spent her life fleeing danger, and the idea of trusting anyone fully, even a kind human, was not easy. I don't know. What comes next? Lyra said softly, her voice trembling slightly. You will, Amer replied, step by step, one at a time. You survived until now, didn't you? She nodded again, a small, fragile gesture of agreement. The words comforted her, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to believe that safety and hope could exist outside her constant fear. Amer offered her a hand. Just a simple gesture, but one full of meaning. Come with me. Let's see the plains together. Slowly, Lyra hesitated. Her instincts screamed caution, warning her to stay hidden, to run, to survive. But something in Amer's calm eyes, in his steady presence, made her consider the possibility of trust. Slowly, carefully, she extended her hand and allowed him to take it. The touch was light, tentative, but it carried the promise of safety and companionship. Together, they stepped outside. The cold bit at their skin, but the world looked softer than it had during the storm. Snow glittered across the plains, untouched and serene. Lyra inhaled deeply, the crisp air filling her lungs, and for the first time in days, she did not flinch. She glanced at Amer, her alien eyes reflecting gratitude, curiosity, and a glimmer of hope. You. Different, she said quietly, her voice carrying wonder rather than fear. You Mai, or smiled, feeling warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Different can be good, he replied. You've seen terrible things, Lyra, but there's kindness in the world too. Not everything hunts, not everything destroys. Some of us protect, some of us care. Her gaze met his, and in that silent moment, the bond they had built over days of fear, patience, and small gestures of trust became undeniable. She had fled the blizzard and horrors beyond it, and yet she had chosen, in a small but meaningful way, to stay and connect with a human. The sun broke through the clouds for a few fleeting moments, casting golden light across the snow. Lyra stepped forward, testing the cold ground with careful movements, feeling its crunch beneath her feet. Amer stayed close, watching, ready to protect her if needed. The world outside had not changed. Danger still lurked, but for this moment, it was calm, beautiful, and filled with possibility. Lyra glanced back at Amer, a quiet smile touching her lips. Thank you, she whispered, the words carrying more meaning than she could ever fully express. Amer nodded, feeling the same gratitude in return. You survived, Lyra. You made it, and together, we'll face whatever comes next. As they stood there, side by side, watching the storm's remnants melt into the soft light of morning, Amer realized something profound. Humanity's strength was not just in surviving storms or fighting creatures, it was in offering kindness, patience, and hope to those who needed it most. Even an alien woman, terrified and alone, could find safety, trust, and companionship in a human heart. And in that moment, Lyra knew she had found more than just shelter. She had found someone who believed in her survival, someone who could show her that even in a harsh world, trust and hope could grow. The storm had finally passed. The world outside Amer's hut was quiet, blanketed in snow that sparkled like diamonds in the soft morning light. For the first time in days, Lyra could look at the plains without fear. She stepped forward slowly, her footsteps crunching softly against the frozen ground. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and snow, and it felt like a new beginning. Amer walked beside her, careful to match her pace. The bond between them had grown over days of fear, patience, and shared silence. Lyra had fled unimaginable dangers, braved blizzards, and survived alone, yet she had chosen to trust him, and in that trust, something extraordinary had taken root. connection between human and alien, fragile but real. You, safe, Lyra whispered, her voice still soft, but no longer trembling, because you. Amer smiled, feeling warmth spread through his chest. And you survived, Lyra. That's the most important thing. You kept going when everything tried to stop you. That takes courage beyond measure. She looked up at him, her alien eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude, curiosity, and something new hope. I never meet human like you, she said. Different, kind, patient. That's what we can be, Amer replied. Not all humans are the same. Some protect, some care, and some try to make a difference. Lyra paused, glancing at the frozen plains stretching endlessly before them. She had spent her life running, hiding, surviving. But now she could feel the possibility of something else: safety, trust, maybe even friendship. Slowly, she reached out and took Amer's hand. The gesture was small, tentative, but it spoke volumes. For the first time, she let herself believe that she could connect with someone without fear. The wind whispered softly, carrying snowflakes across the plains, but it no longer felt threatening. Lyra lifted her head, letting the sunlight touch her face. She inhaled deeply, savoring the cold, clean air. World. Different now, she said, almost to herself. Not only destroy, sometimes care. Amer nodded. Yes, and sometimes it's humans who show the way. You came here terrified, but look at you now. You've survived storms, fear, and darkness. And you're still here, ready to face what comes next. Lyra looked at him, her gaze steady for the first time. You show hope. You help, even stranger. Why? Amer thought for a moment, then said simply, because it's what humans can do. We survive, we fight, but most importantly, we help. That's what makes us strong. She stayed silent for a moment, letting his words sink in. Then, slowly, a faint smile curved her lips. It was a small thing, but to Amer, it was monumental. She had been terrified, alone, and hunted. Yet she now felt a spark of something she hadn't known in a long time: safety, trust, and the promise of kindness. Thank you, Lyra said finally, for everything. Amer squeezed her hand gently. No, Lyra, thank you. You remind me why humans can be more than survivors. We can be protectors. We can inspire hope, even in the darkest times. You taught me that today, in your own way. For a long while, they stood together in silence, looking out over the plains. Snow glittered in the morning sun, and the world felt still and full of possibility. The storm had passed, but more importantly, the fear that had gripped Lyra's heart had loosened. She had faced unimaginable dangers and found not only shelter, but understanding and compassion. Finally, she looked at Amer. Go now, journey continues, she said. But remember, human, different, strong, help. Amer nodded, a soft smile on his lips. And you, Lyra, remember that you survived. That's stronger than anything else, and you'll always find kindness, even in strangers, if you look for it. Lyra inclined her head, then turned toward the horizon. The snow stretched endlessly before her, but she walked with steadier steps now. She knew there would be dangers ahead, but she also knew that courage, trust, and kindness could make even the harshest world bearable. As she disappeared into the sparkling plains, Amer watched, a quiet pride filling him. Humanity's strength was not in weapons, power, or dominance. It was in compassion, patience, and the courage to protect those in need. An alien woman, terrified and alone, had found hope and trust in a human heart, and that, he realized, was the true meaning of being human. The fire in the hut flickered behind him, warm and steady, as if echoing the lesson he had learned. Even in the coldest, harshest world, humanity could shine through fear, danger, and despair. And that light, that strength of heart, could change everything.